everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. And you are still going to get the full program tonight, so no worries there. I'm Jackie Leventhal, and I'm the Chief Brand and Content Officer here at 6th and I. Whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our partner, Politics and Prose Bookstore, thank you for being with us tonight and for your support of a nonprofit and an independent bookstore. This is an exciting time for 6th and I and Politics and Prose because we're both celebrating milestone anniversaries. 20 years for 6th and I and 40 years for Politics and Prose. Thank you. You all seem like the kind of people who would like to help us celebrate, am I right? Okay. So here at 6th and I, the most impactful way you can toast our anniversary is to donate 20 bucks for 20 years. It's really a bargain. There are QR codes on the back of the pews that you can scan to make a donation easily through Venmo, and we sincerely thank you. And to help Politics and Prose celebrate, you can of course buy lots of books from them, now and always, and also attend their 40th anniversary celebration on June 22nd at their Connecticut Avenue store. Some of you may have been in the audience at our past events when Jen Psaki interviewed Dan Pfeiffer and Andy Cohen. Andy was actually here last night for an event, and he sends his regards to Jen. At both of those programs, with much respect for our past guests, I remember thinking to myself, I just want to hear more from Jen. So it is fitting that the title of her book is Say More. Jen served as the 34th White House press secretary under President Biden. From the start of his administration, Jen worked to set a new tone for the country, restoring a sense of calm and respect for the role of the media in our democracy. Jen earned praise for her deep understanding of policy and for the warmth, humor, intelligence, and edge that she brought to the role of press secretary. During her more than 20 years of public service, Jen also served as White House Communications Director under President Obama and as the spokesperson for the State Department under then Secretary of State John Kerry. She now hosts her own MSNBC show, Inside with Jen Psaki, on Sunday afternoons and Monday nights. In Say More, Jen shares the lessons she's learned throughout her career and offers advice about how to be a more effective communicator, whether with preschoolers, partners, or presidents. The book is really a masterclass in how to connect with an audience and how to listen actively from one of the most candid and clear communicators of our time. Tonight, Jen Psaki will be in conversation with the award-winning journalist, Swisher, who just flew in from Germany, so we very much appreciate the effort that she made to be here. Kara hosts the podcast On with Swisher, and she co-hosts Pivot, and we had the pleasure of hosting her back in February for the release of her book, Burn Book, which we have autographed copies of for sale tonight. Later in the program, we would love to hear your questions, and you'll be invited to line up at the microphones in either aisle. Thank you all again, both here and at home, for joining us. Please help me give Jen Psaki and Swisher a warm welcome to 6th and I.
So, I'm going to take my glasses off because I feel like being intimate.
I love it. Let's be intimate.
I always put, so whenever I have them on, people go, why do you have them on? I'm like, I'm trying to avoid intimacy.
It's also your look. It's your vibe.
Like,
You've kept aviators cool. Don't give Joe Biden credit.
Yeah. Yes.
Really, no. Kara.
I was first.
You were first. Just for facts.
Don't try to spin me, Jen Psaki. Anyway, let's talk about your book. I'm so excited. I did just leave, just was in Germany. I was interviewing Kim Kardashian, so this will be similar.
I know. She texted me this today, and she was like, just so you know, the last person I interviewed was Kim Kardashian. That's like all she said. I was like, okay, I'll try to keep it interesting and edgy.
So how's the corset going? No, let's not discuss that. She thought it was an error, Kim did. Anyway, and it was. So let's start talking about your book. I read it on the plane, which I'm very excited.
Thank you.
And I'm really, there's so much we have to talk about. So first of all, what's happening here with the picture? What are you trying to communicate? Since it's say more, what are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say, it's funny, this picture is from the White House press secretary's office in the White House. There are a lot of stories from that in there. This is actually from a Vogue photo shoot, which is something I never thought would come out of my mouth ever, but that's what it's from. I think I'm trying to say, like, I'm serious, but don't mess with me in the photo.
And I'm serious, but don't mess with me.
That's it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's what it does say. I have to say it does. It's
Good.
I was like, Jen, you're so mean. It's good, but I like it. But I like it at the same time. So
I'm not mean. I need to keep people on their edge, you know?
No. Everybody likes you, Jen. You're going to have to live with it. So let me start to the idea of say more. We had talked about this book when you were writing about it and what you were trying to impart. Why don't you talk a little bit about what your goal was and why you called it? I'd like to know what you didn't call it, and why you called it this.
I called it this because I think, especially in the industry of politics and government and media too, oftentimes there's this perception that if you talk louder and say more words and have the last word, that you're the most impactful and effective communicator.
Right.
And it's actually not true. So it doesn't mean say more words or say more louder. It means say more effectively. And so it's a little bit of a play on that argument. Right. But really, because the title also is because this book is full of lessons I've learned over the course of my career, over 20 years, and how I grew into who I am today. Many mistakes that I've made, times I've screwed up, things I wish I would have handled differently, times where I had imposter syndrome, things like that, and how I kind of learned to say more as well.
So when you're talking about that, one of the things that press people try to do, I'm going to start with your career as that, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing now, is to keep things away from people, right? Or not to sort of control the narrative. And you talk about that a lot, of like how you communicate and what you're trying to communicate, and that's certainly changed over time, and we'll also get into that. But one of the what you're best known for is being the press secretary, President Biden. And when you came in, the story, I think it was the Washington Post, it might have been the New York Times, said, no attacks, no lectures, no crowd fixation about you, is your entrance into it. And it was referring to, obviously, Sean Spicer. Now, again, arguably a low bar for press secretary. But
can I just interject a funny Sean Spicer story?
Oh, okay. Well, they're all funny in a way. But.
Well, okay. So when I first started my job, I was on Wait, Don't Tell Me. And I told this story about how when I was nervous or just needed a laugh, that I would pull up Sean Spicer shimmying in the lime green shirt on Dancing with the Stars, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. And this is like a very good humored thing to do, sent me a framed signed photo of him in that shirt, which I was like, good for you, Sean Spicer.
Yeah.
Right? So
it seems like the stuff of nightmares to me, but sure, why not?
The shimmy shirt is.
Okay. I prefer the Melissa McCarthy version of him.
Yeah, that's good.
Around the thing. But one of the things you write at the beginning of the book is we monologue more and dialogue less. There's more winning over understanding. So let's set the table for the whole book, this idea of how you're giving tips and different things you learned, both mistakes and things you did well over the course of your career. And you worked at the State Department, you worked in the field in Iowa, you had some private sector jobs. Talk a little bit about where we are today, so we can set it up, and then let's go back and see how it changed. So when you say this, more monologue and dialogue less, that's a hopeful thing because I don't see it going to more dialogue at this moment in time.
Yeah, and that may be true writ large as a country. I think the goal I had when I wrote that part, and also a part of my goal of the book, was to give people some tools to how to engage directly with each other. And I will say one of the things that's surprised me, I don't know if surprise is the right word, about not everyone, but some people in their 20s, is that they don't even know how to ask each other on a date sometimes, right? They don't know how to engage in difficult conversations or take feedback or give feedback. And some of that, I think, is not their fault. It is growing up in an age where everybody's communicating over Snapchat, over social media apps, where people were in their homes for COVID. It was a trauma for the country. And so a lot of when I was thinking about who I was writing this book to, I was thinking about that audience.
Right.
And that message that it doesn't mean don't use Snapchat. We love Snapchat. I just mean you need to also learn how to engage in conversations in person, and that's often where you have the best conversations.
So, but things have changed rather significantly, not just because social media is the coarsening of dialogue, it's the difficulty, it's the performative nature of everything now, although it was performative before.
Yeah.
It's moved into a much different state, even since you were in
That is true, and it can be quite personal, and it is very easy to bully over Twitter than it is to bully in person. And what I've found, and I don't usually use, but you always make people say stuff, so I'm just going to say it.
Okay. Good.
Ben Shapiro, has a very popular podcast, conservative, attacked me personally.
What a shock.
Many times. But but at one point he attacked me personally, I think it was sometime last summer, about something. I saw him in person a couple of weeks later, and I said, "Hey, Ben, how are you? Great to see you. How's your family?"
Yeah.
Did he attack me in person? He did not.
Right.
And it doesn't mean he won't attack me again.
He will.
He will, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe even tonight. We don't even know. But my point is that is still, it is much easier to attack and to go negative with a lot of these tools, and there's still an opportunity to break through that. That's it.
You'll never break through to Ben Shapiro, but fine. Good luck with that.
Not Ben Shapiro necessarily, although we had nice conversations about
No.
family.
Yeah?
I know.
Okay.
We did.
See, I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
He attacked me too. I know it's shocking.
I
He
mean,
loves
I know.
women.
Join the club. We both probably can't go to Russia either.
Yeah,
it's fine.
no, but he did that, and at one point he's like, I think he was trying to be friendly. I was like, no, there'll be no friendliness ever again. But let's go through then. So where we are right now is sort of a coarse place in terms of dialogue and political communication. Let's start where you started off and some of the tips that you were trying to make throughout this book for people. Talk a little bit about where you've been. I don't know if people know your entire backstory. You talk about it a lot in this book.
Well, I mean, I started out in politics when I interned in college, but then it took me a couple of years out of college to decide that I wanted to go into politics. And I really ended up doing it because I was volunteering for the Arlington Democratic Party. I was probably the youngest person. I was like 23. Hopefully more young people are doing that now. There was a guy who was 30 who I thought was like ancient at the time, who said, "You should go work on a campaign." And that's what I did. And that was 2002. I loved it. I was bitten by the political bug. I loved being a part of something bigger than myself. I door knocked. I had a Palm Pilot.
You did have a Palm Pilot.
And I really moved through the political world.
Talk about that, because one of the parts that I thought was interesting is I door knocked too.
Yeah.
Pat Goodell, I'm a little older.
Did you have a Palm Pilot?
They didn't have cell phones.
Oh, you weren't as modern
I'm
as me.
significantly older than you, but you had a thing called a pencil and a paper. It was really cool. Cool technology.
That works too. That works too.
Yeah, it did incredibly, and you could get it wet. So talk a little bit about that door knocking, because it brought me back to doing that, which I did not like at all. But you enjoyed that idea. You learned a lot about communication. During that time.
I did. Door knocking, if people haven't done it here, just you get a list of basically people on a street, and then they're voting history. So you know who you're either door knocking and you know that you're trying to convince them to support your candidate, or you're trying to get them out to vote. You kind of know what your assignment is. The voter file is imperfect. So sometimes it's like you think it's an 80-year-old lady and it's like a guy in his underwear and with a shotgun. This literally happened to me. So like, it's imperfect, but the point is you have about 15 seconds to convince people to listen to you. I will say now when people come and knock on my door, I'm like, oh, what do they want, right?
Yeah.
And I'm usually like, thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Okay, I'm good. I vote. But what it taught me is kind of how you can the importance of that first 5 or 10 seconds, right? Of convincing people to engage with you.
Right.
So it sticks with me. I also went in people's houses when I wasn't supposed to. I did lots of things you're not supposed to do. My mother's here. I blame her for this quality of mine. But yes.
So when you went there, you were trying to engage people who didn't agree with you, correct? Which is
Not always.
not always.
Because there's different phases in an election cycle. And so sometimes when I was door knocking, you were going to try to help understand what people's issues, what they cared about, and what the issues were that were going to move them in the election cycle. So they might say, I care about climate. And you're like, well, you care about climate, you may be on my team, and you may just not know you're on my team.
Right.
If somebody said, you kind of get an indication of where somebody may be leaning by how they answered the questions. And we were doing surveys over a Palm Pilot.
Right. So you did that, and you worked in a lot of campaigns like that. You were in Iowa, you were various places. When you think about that time of doing that, what kind of assets did that give you from where you moved next?
I think it gave me, I mean, there was a lot of time between that and standing at the White House podium, but being able to be, hopefully, building my ability to be good at my feet, and trying to approach answering questions or asking people questions with a demeanor that wouldn't make people want to shut the door in your face. I mean, Ben Shapiro and others still want to shut the door in my face, but you get what I'm saying.
So when you moved on pretty quickly and you moved up the ranks relatively quickly. And I'm going to fast forward. You worked for the Obama administration, worked for different things, but you also worked in the State Department.
Yeah.
And that to me was the most interesting part of that, because this is an area you didn't have much expertise in, correct?
It's true. Actually, when I went to the State Department, and I talk a lot about people who have mentored me and given you advice, and kind of what you take and what you don't take. And one of my mentors at the time, Robert Gibbs, said, "Oh, you shouldn't do this job. You could really mess up, and you're on a good career trajectory." Another friend, Ben Rhodes, said, "You should do it. You'll be great. You can learn the beat." I ended up doing it, because sometimes when people tell me not to do something, then I want to do it more. But I ended up doing it, and it was a huge education, not just in foreign policy, but also kind of in how communications is a tool in moving an objective forward. Because when you're at the State Department, this is true in negotiations in Congress too, communications is like how you send a message to another country. And when I was there, this was in 2014 and 2015, there was a lot happening in the world. A coup in Egypt, we didn't call it a coup at the time, it was definitely a coup. Middle East peace negotiations, Iran nuclear deal that we were working through. Assad had used chemical weapons against his own people. It was a lot. Ben Rhodes actually called me at one point and said, "I know I convinced you to do this job. It's not always like this." Like, it was just so crazy.
Yes, it is.
But what it taught me is I would do a briefing sometimes, and the foreign secretary of Russia, Lavrov, would call John Kerry and say, "Why did she say that?" Or Prime Minister Netanyahu, still the same guy who was in the job back then, would say, "Why did she say that?" Because sometimes you were sending a message from the United States to another country, and really the audience of those briefings was other countries and the people who watched their television station.
And in that case, the reporters were very important. Correct?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that, because it's a different audience than what you had at the White House.
Yes. So the reporters at the State Department press corps is an amazing press corps. They're brilliant. They know their beat. They know the issues better than people in the building. Not everybody, but some people in the building. There's actually a guy named Matt Lee, who's the AP reporter, who's kind of a curmudgeon, but is a great, brilliant reporter who kind of tests everybody new who's in that job. But what they do in the State Department is the reporters decide how long you stay on an issue in the room. So they can say, you may start the briefing on China, and if they're ready to move on after 15 minutes, you move on. If not, take you 45 minutes. But what I also learned from them, and I tell this story in the book, is now we're all very familiar with Russian propaganda and the Kremlin propaganda machine. It was less familiar back in 2014 and 2015. And unless reporters had really covered Russia, they didn't really know much about it. And because I was there when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, I became a prime target of the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin and their propaganda machine.
Explain what they did.
What they did is a lot of it was very gendered. They went after me and made up things I said that I never said. They had a nightly show on RT that was about me that they broadcast in Russia and in Eastern European countries where they made up a term. And I'm talking about people who worked in the Kremlin, like the government, made up a term called Psakiing, which they defined as making up something you didn't know. They talked about my clothes, what I wore, how I looked. A lot of it was gendered. And they basically, I was apparently on a Kremlin playing card. I've never seen that. I would like those. If anybody finds those, please give them to me. So it was, and now I can laugh about it. At the time, I was getting questions from reporters here, well-intentioned, who were saying things like, are you concerned you're a distraction in U.S.-Russian relations? I mean, you don't really want to get that email from a reporter. And I was feeling, if you're wondering how it feels to be the target of a propaganda machine in Russia, it does not feel good. It feels very bad. And it took me some time, and actually some of the reporters who worked there, who had been Moscow bureau chiefs, who said, this is a badge of honor, right? They think you're effective, and you're reaching their audience, and so they need to discredit you. And they've obviously done it to much more prominent people than me since then, and had before then. Secretary Clinton, Mike McFaul, many others. But this is the tactic they used. And the propaganda, and some of these tactics and
One of the things you talked about in the book, too, was the idea of having so much prep, because it was not an area, at the same time, you don't want to boil the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Because, and including making sure, in this case, Secretary Kerry wasn't saying things he shouldn't.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's a difficult thing for, PR people fall into two camps, ones that are way too loyal and get very defensive, and those who are pretty savvy about correcting things or having a honest relationship with the press.
I mean, I talk about this a lot in my book, is the different kinds of bosses I had and the different bosses and the tactics I used. And the story of Secretary Kerry is when I first started working for him, as you said, Kara, I was still learning about, I slept with a book about Syria in my bed, hoping it was going to get in by osmosis. You can learn, communications and the ability to do it. You got to learn your beat and learn as much as you can, but then you can communicate about it. But for the first several months, because he had been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he's a foot taller than me. It's not super relevant, but I don't know. It flies into the whole vibe going on. And
height has nothing to do with intelligence.
That's true. I know. And also, yes, exactly. But or maybe shorter people are smarter. We don't know.
That's correct.
It's not disproven. It hasn't been disproven.
That's completely correct.
But I initially, for the first several months of working for him, my feedback was if he said something that was, and I not aligned with U.S. policy abroad, right? Not a good thing. I would say to him, so that's not exactly what our position is as a country, and we'll figure it out. And I was very gentle. David Wade, who had been his longtime communications director and was the State Department chief of staff, amazing boss. He didn't travel with us much. He came on a trip with us maybe 6 months into my time there. And Secretary Kerry said something that was not aligned with the U.S. position. It was something about
military in Japan.
The military in Japan, so not a light issue. And as soon as he said it, I was thinking to myself, oh God, I'm going to have to call the White House because this is going to be a thing. And David gets up immediately and says, sir, that was a disaster. What you said was not our policy. It was an absolute disaster. And I was like, oh, I've been doing this wrong. And what I learned, Secretary, he's not a shrinking violet. The man won Purple Hearts. He can take feedback. Right. And so I started giving him much more aggressive feedback to the point where, sometimes CEOs and ambassadors would travel with us, and they were like, that was very aggressive, what you just said to him. And it's like, well, yeah, because that's what he needs. And he can take it, and we had a great relationship.
So then you moved to the Obama White House. Different relationship with him. Yeah. You had wanted a higher job there, but got a different job. But talk about that time in the Obama White House.
So I started working for Barack Obama when I was 28, something like that. And he was already a larger-than-life figure. He'd given that speech at the 2004 convention. He was the most popular person every candidate wanted. I mean, he gave the best speech at a convention probably ever. And I really wanted to work for him. And because of that, I was also intimidated by him. And it took me a while, a couple of years, and I talk about this and kind of my journey, to really feel comfortable to give him feedback and to say something in meetings. I was so afraid I was going to say something stupid or say something he already knew. Sometimes he already knew it, and he would tell you he already knew it, which is fine.
Yes, he would. Yeah.
And
I found him rather lectury, but go ahead.
Well, I didn't. I worked for him for 10 years, but it took me a while. I was like if I was on a manifest to a meeting, I'd be like, I don't have to go. I'll just be here. I'll just organize things. It took me a while until I was really forced in 2012 because I was traveling with him on his re-election campaign, and I actually said to Robert Gibbs, how am I going to convince him that I am somebody who can give him advice? And he was like, act like you belong there, and at a certain point, he'll believe it. And you do belong there. It's not that I didn't belong there. But it taught me a lot about just having that confidence to speak up to bosses and give feedback and not worry about them thinking something you say is stupid. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not.
Talk a little bit about, you also discussed a lot of the mistakes you made there, stuff you didn't do correctly, and then stuff you did. Give me an example of each.
Oh, yeah. I have many. I mean, we've all made mistakes. In 2009, you remember when we named the pay czar, Ken Feinberg? A little bit controversial.
Right.
For people who
Compensation czar.
Compensation czar. We shorthanded it. Well, some people shorthanded it. Basically, Ken Feinberg was overseeing CEO compensation and determining for companies that had been bailed out. It was controversial. Around that time, everybody wanted interviews with him. We gave a couple of television networks interviews. Fox News ultimately got one, but they didn't get one initially. I'd had a long day. And I wrote some things in an email I wouldn't recommend because government emails are FOIA-able, which means people can get access to them. So what I'd written in this email was, one, I watched Bret Baier's interview. He's a lunatic, and so was his thing. It was crazy. And also, I'm so tired of them, I want to put a dead fish in their cubbyhole, which, by the way, is a play on something Rahm Emanuel used to joke about. I didn't make the fish thing up.
He sent a fish.
He sent a fish. So it was kind of a thing. Now, fast forward, the emails don't come out for a year because that's how it works. And let me tell you, it didn't translate well when they came out. They didn't come out well. And I kept thinking to myself, what is my mother, who's here, going to think when she sees my emails, right? You're like, oh my God, I'm like a 30-something-year-old person. And I sent him an email that just basically said, we don't know each other really, but it's not how I engage with people. I'm really sorry. Something along those lines. He could have just replied and said, screw you, you know? I mean, he could have said, thank you. He could have said anything. And instead, he invited me to lunch. And we went to lunch. We talked about our families. We talked about life. And I just always, look, I've disagreed with plenty of things he said. It's not about that. I think working at Fox would be a traumatizing experience. But I always remember that because he handled it with tremendous grace. He didn't have to. And that taught me a lot, too, about trying to be more patient also as people who I worked with made mistakes.
Right. Or don't type things.
Don't put things.
Because you had a famous one where you sent an email around to the whole press corps.
I did. I also had this email with Robert Gibbs in 2003. I was trying to impress him because he was like high up on the food chain on the Kerry campaign. And we had a back and forth exchange about the Dean campaign. It was the summer of Dean in 2003. Howard Dean is a great man, and he's running for governor, and good luck for him. So I feel still bad about this, but this is a long time ago. And I accidentally CC'd the entire Iowa press corps on this exchange. It was a moment where I was like, it's over now. My career's over.
Right.
And it was fun, and I had a good run.
Right.
It was brief.
Yeah.
It was a year and a half, but
and it just gave intel, right, about his advertising.
Oh, it was like advertising, but then it was like, this is, I can't even remember what was in the email, but it was not one you should.
I love when I get emails like that. I love when that's happened to me a lot of times. One time, Microsoft sent me their earnings a day in advance.
Whoa, what'd you do?
I told them because it's illegal.
Oh, because it's, yeah.
Yeah, and they were like,
Oh, yeah.
You know, oops, I just said it out loud.
Yeah,
Well, that's
email.
what they did.
It's just
Oh,
don't put anything in email. That's really
well, in any case, they didn't mean to do it. I don't know how I got on the whatever. Too bad. Not my fault. I did not do any insider trading.
no.
I considered it briefly, but then didn't do it.
Now you've told the whole story.
I know, there it is. It's done. That's the whole thing. I can't believe I left it out of my book. So fast forward to the Biden administration, because you wanted a higher ranking job in the Obama administration, which you
Yeah,
didn't
I mean,
get.
I was the twice a bridesmaid, never the bride on the press secretary job, and I talk about that. I was when I never expected to go back to government, so actually going
You
back.
left and went to Carnegie, right?
I worked for Obama for on and off for 8 years in the White House, part of the State Department. I came back in and out, but I never expected I would go back after that was over. Which was kind of a real gift, because when you go back and you don't expect it, you can kind of smell the roses more. You get a little less stressed out about things. But yes.
So going back, what was your thing? You wanted that big job, and why?
Well, I actually went back. I worked on the transition. I had not worked on the Biden campaign. I was working at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for Bill Burns, who's currently doing a lot of work overseas. I worked for him. I was a CNN contributor. I had our son, who's now 6. So I was on the outside, and I felt this feeling that a lot of people had in the moment, like, I don't know, I want to do something to be helpful. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. And I called Jeff Zients, who's now the White House Chief of Staff, but was running the transition, and Anita Dunn, and I said, hey, like, because people volunteer on the transition, and people do every transition sometimes. And I said, hey, like, I'd love to help with something. I don't know if I could help a cabinet member get confirmed, or I don't know, whatever. Maybe I could prep somebody for something. And they came back and they were like, how about if you run the whole war room to get every cabinet member confirmed? And I was like, okay, that's a different thing. But I did that, and at one point, and you know Ron Klain, so this may make you laugh, he said, we're getting attacked by people for not doing briefings, so can you just like do a briefing tomorrow? I was like, from my house? Like, okay. So I did one, and I didn't join the transition seeking out a job. I didn't think I would go into the administration, but they asked me if I was interested. I talked to my husband about it because we had 2 little kids. And yeah, that's how I ended up.
And you didn't have a relationship with Biden,
I didn't, and I actually, when the Biden team asked me if I would be open to being considered, it's like I'd always wanted that job. I literally said to them, this is like talking yourself out of a job. I was like, but he doesn't really know me. I don't know how that relationship, and they were like, you guys are gonna get along great. It's gonna be fine. And I went to meet with him. I remember it being kind of the week of Thanksgiving, and I drove up to Delaware. It was the day the national security team was being announced, and I had this meeting with him, and in a very John Kerry way, because John Kerry's, the perception of him I find to be so off of who he actually is. He said to me, why are you here? And I said, oh, I'm actually meeting with President Biden about this press secretary job. I don't know how it's going to go. And he was like, I'll put in a good word for you. I was like, oh, you don't, sir. It's like, you're being announced as like the climate czar. Don't worry about it. So he did it in the most John Kerry way, which is the entire national security team is waiting. The president comes in, he's thanking each of them. Tony Blinken, this is Jake Sullivan. He's like, before they go out to do the announcement, he's thanking each of them. He's like, I'm so grateful. And he ends with John Kerry, and he says, you're my friend. I'm so grateful you're addressing this big challenge. And in this moment, John Kerry goes, I want to thank Jen Psaki because she's here. And I was like, what's happening right now? It was like, by putting a good word, I thought he was going to be like, she's great, she worked for me. He was like, she was always by my side and always gave me good advice. And I was like, oh God. It's like people who are like, I kind of have a crush
And
on
all
that
of a sudden you were head of the CIA.
Yeah, it was right. I know. I was like, oh my God. So that happened even before our interview. But actually, when we sat down, Dr. Biden was with the president as well, which I loved. Because she's just like such a straight shooter.
She is.
And he really, I don't know, I kind of thought he was going to like grill me about the South China Sea and like political districts or something. I was like all prepped and ready. And he really just wanted to talk about how afraid the country was and how concerned he was about how to heal that. And, not to be totally naive, you just ran against a guy and you kind of punched him in the face every day verbally, right? But he wanted me to not be an attack dog in the briefing room. He wanted me to take down the temperature in the briefing room is kind of what he conveyed to me, even in that conversation about it.
So that's where you got really well known. You were natural. First of all, I want to know, why would you want that job? Did you think it was like Alice and Janney in West Wing?
No,
What were you doing? That was your vibe, I think.
First of all, she's great. I love her.
Oh, good.
I had never seen The West Wing until 2011, actually, and then I watched the whole series, and it made me go back to government. John Kirby and I have this in common.
Did you do the Jaguar? But go ahead, sorry.
John Kirby and I have this in common, which is that I loved the briefing every day. I thought it was so fun to engage with reporters.
Okay.
And some days you're completely battered sometimes because you do a bad job, and other times because you have no information that they want. And that's just like the policy process doesn't always work as quickly as reporters' questions. That's just how it goes. But I don't know. I had worked in the press office. I'd worked in the communications office. I joke I've had every office in the West. I've literally been in it. I've worked in every office in the West Wing and in the press and communications offices. And I'd always wanted to do that job. And so...
But why?
Because I think it forces you to, and this did every day I was in that job, to learn how to communicate things clearly and effectively. There's nothing like pressure and also the pressure cooker of being absolutely brutalized if you mess up in the press briefing. And I loved that pressure.
Well, you were natural. People really liked you. You were aware of that pretty quickly, correctly. I don't think. Why do you think you worked? Why do you think you worked? It worked for you there. We'll get to Ducey in a minute, but go ahead, because that was fun.
My giant friend. I am, and this is easy for me to say now, because the first time I didn't get the press secretary job, I was like, thank God, because I am not ready to do that job, and Jay Carney is like a zillion more levels of experience. The second time I didn't get it, and my friend Josh Earnest, who I love and I'm still friends with, got it. I was pretty devastated. I mean, as devastated you can be about not getting a job. But I actually think the third time, I was much more ready for it, and I was much more comfortable in my own skin. I had spent time in the State Department doing that job for 2.5 years, which is harder in a lot of ways because it is so substantive and so policy-driven in there, you better know what you're talking about. The White House briefing is too, but it can get a little repetitive, and it can also get a little surface because a lot of it's televised. So it worked for me, I think, because I was more comfortable in my own skin. I was much more prepared. I'd had more experience. And also because when I started working for President Biden, I was like 41 or 2. I was just a more mature human, you know? And so I wasn't nervous about being in the Oval Office with him or asking him questions.
And you were in the room, because that's critical, correct? Because there was a point where Ron Klain didn't necessarily, you couldn't lie about things you didn't know about.
Correct. And I always could go into meetings in the Oval, I could always go into like senior advisor meetings in the Oval Office. What I had a slight disagreement with Ron Klain about was meetings with classified information, because this is an argument that people have in government. There may even be a West Wing episode about it. I don't know. Maybe somebody. Where his belief, and he had worked for many administrations, is that it's difficult as the press secretary to go out and not say things that you know. I am a believer that you need to know everything so that you can communicate accurately with the press. And you just have to learn. And I did from experience what lines you can't cross. So that was the discussion we had. He relented pretty quickly. It was just his past experience from that. And it's kind of a debate people have different views on.
So when you're in that job, you could say the wrong thing pretty quickly. You had a couple times where you did that. Talk about those, and give me also one where you think you were very successful.
I had a couple of times I royally screwed up. Most of those times, the common factor was I was too flippant about something, including once when I was asked about the Space Force.
Yes, you made fun of Space Force.
Which was
I was disappointed with you about that, too.
You were?
Yeah, because I had interviewed the head of Space Force. It's a serious group of people.
It is a serious...
It's not a Steve Carell show.
Okay, can I just say something, though?
I mean, it is.
I know, that was what's going on in my mind. It is a serious group of people. The work they do is very important. The name, they're like hurt by the branding of the name. So let me just say that. That was what was going on in my head.
What would you call them?
I don't know, but Space Force is literally the name of a Steve Carell movie.
Right, okay.
Could we have done something different?
Yeah, I like it.
So I was asked about the Space Force. I was a little flippant in my answer about it. I got a lot of I apologized the next day. Some people in the right wing were like, it was like, she wants to go to war with China. I mean, it was crazy. Their attacks on me were crazy. But anyway, I did screw up. The head of the Space Force, or one of the people who was the heads, I can't remember, he was a high-up person, brought me a Space Force pin to his credit, which I then kept in my desk because it was kind of a reminder of not to be flippant. But I did have a few screw-ups like that.
What did you do well, do you think you did?
I think that because I had worked on so many negotiations in Congress and also internationally, that I was probably at my best when I had an objective of, say, like when we were communicating about the infrastructure bill, and it was like, we know what we're trying to get done and what we're trying to put out there. I do think that COVID, that was a key part of, we had some things that we didn't communicate as well about COVID as an administration, but I think that the briefing room became, again, a forum for a place where people could get accurate information at a time where people were very scared. So those are a couple.
So no bleach.
No, we had no bleach. We had a lot of Fauci, but also treating it as a room where we were trying to provide information that was not always a political attack, or it wasn't always. It was people tune in, they tune into a clip of it, and maybe they're learning something about like where they can go for a test or where they can go for a to get more information, and that I think was so dominant in the first 6 to 8 months.
So one of the things that happened, and I do mean this in an important way, you had a lot of fame pretty quickly. Why do you think that was?
Which is like the weirdest thing. I still like when people recognize me now. Still, they'll go, "Oh, are you?" And I'm like, I think I know you. And I'm like so awkward sometimes. I'm sorry if I do this to anyone. I'm Jen. I'm Jen, and they're like, "No, I know." Yeah. And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
No, but I think it was from that briefing. I was talking to my son on the way here from the airport, and I said, "Oh, I'm interviewing someone." Jen Psaki. He goes, "I know Jen Psaki," like as if he was offended that I wouldn't.
Oh, that's
think,
very nice.
Yeah.
I think that there were aspects of it I hope were good that I contributed to in terms of we followed an administration where there was lies, there was attacking of the press, there was disinformation, there was a president telling you to inject bleach into your arms. So in many ways, there was a low bar. So I benefited from that. I did also enjoy the job, and I respect and value reporters. We had arguments, but it was not, I don't think, ever adversarial in a damaging way. And I think that, I hope people who are watching could see that. Even with Peter Doocy, I will say the Peter Doocy piece certainly
it became
sparked.
a thing.
It became a thing.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think
you shut him down all the time. It was like a sitcom. It was like, it was all great sitcoms are smart ladies slapping down Homer Simpson, essentially. I don't know if you know that. Just think about it. No, think about it, Archie. It is. It's the dumb guy and the smart, sharp, sassy lady.
Oh, there you go. Like Homer.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
so you're Marge
Homer
in that scenario.
I'm Marge. He's Homer. I don't know if we either of us like that.
What do you think was happening there with that? Because why it did spark so much attention?
Well, I think for us, we made a decision. I made a decision, everyone supported, that I was going to call on Fox News every single day.
You did that, yeah.
Because it was part of our effort to show that we were going to talk to everybody. I actually did Fox News Sunday with your friend Chris Wallace, who I also like, more than any other Sunday show when I was the press secretary, because I think it's very important to communicate to a range of audiences, even when the questions are tough or unfair or whatever they may be. I don't think Chris Wallace asks any unfair questions, but sometimes in the briefing room we get a little silly in there. But I think that we called on him every day. I called on him every day. And it's a little predictable the Fox rotation of things, I'll say. So, and he was often delivering that, right? So you could watch. You have 4 screens in the press secretary's office of all of the cable networks, well, 3 and then CNBC or whatever it may be. And you could see, and it was like either in the rotation of fire and brimstone that included crime, immigrants, and something else, you just see which one was kind of front and center for them.
Right.
And that was probably what's going to come up. So you just prepared for that, not because I was necessarily going to convince the Fox News audience. I saw it as, one, it's important to send even answering the question sends a message, but also hopefully you're providing some tools for people to use in terms of what the answer to some of these attacks are. So I don't know, that's how I thought about it.
Did he ever once top you? I don't think so. Do you remember when he asked a good question?
I mean, there were days, the truth also is there were times, certainly when I was the press secretary, where I had this mug, somebody made me a mug that was NACP, which means not a comms problem, because sometimes things are policy problems, and people are like, it's a messaging issue. It's like, no, there's a dictator killing his people with chemical weapons. That is not a communications problem. That's like a horrible thing the U.S. needs to do something about.
You had that issue with Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, yes, I do talk on this story, and my husband hates this story, and he's here, but
I'll tell it anyway.
It's okay. No, he was right. He was right. I did an interview with Chris Wallace. It was a time where Saudi Arabia was still their human rights have a very terrible human rights record, and Jamal Khashoggi, who was a Washington Post reporter, was killed, and it was a time where the United States was going to re-engage and talk to some of the leaders of Saudi Arabia. Now, Joe Biden had called him a pariah or something like that when he was running for president. So when we re-engaged with them, people were like, what's going on here? And I went and did a bunch of interviews, and I think in the moment I thought to myself, I'm going to tell them everything I know about Saudi Arabia and U.S. relations, which was a lot, actually. That's not the thing to do, because it looks like you are evasive, like you are not answering the question. And I spit out everything I knew about the relationship, and I said to Chris Wallace something like, or he kind of pushed me on it, and I said, well, our position is very clear. And he was like, no, it's not, right? And he was right. And so the funny part of this story is that after I did the interview, I checked my cell phone, and we were making plans with our kids, and my husband and my sister and brother-in-law, who are also here, were on a text chain. They were like, that wasn't her best. They were right. But I was also on the text chain, so that was
forgot
the thing that was
you
awkward.
on the text chain.
Yeah, that was the thing that was awkward about it.
Or maybe they didn't forget you were on the text
Or maybe
chain.
they were sending me a message, which is okay too. They were not incorrect. This is about taking feedback.
So
that's part of the book.
I have a couple more things, and then we'll get some questions from the audience. At the end, I'm going to ask you, I want you to give PR advice to a number of people.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But did one of them shoot their puppy in the face?
I'm not sure if it was in the face.
Okay, I don't know. I'm quoting Megyn Kelly lately.
Okay.
So I
quoting Megyn Kelly, that's always a road to intelligence.
I know. That's right. That's probably not where I should start.
Meghan Markle. She's obsessed with Meghan Markle, honestly. Whatever, Meghan. She doesn't. It's because she doesn't spell the name right, I guess, or something. Meghan. You switched to journalism, essentially. Would you think you're a journalist?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think there is a lot of space in journalism and media for a range of people. I don't pretend I don't have an opinion, clearly. I have an opinion. And I think there is a huge place for AP Wire reporting, for investigative reporting. I still get nervous if investigative reporters call me, and I'm like, there's nothing I know at this point. And for foreign journalists. But I think there's also a space for people who have opinion and have an informed opinion. And I do it with facts. I do think that's a part of a big
you do
umbrella.
Interviews. Did you sort of follow sort of the George Stephanopoulos kind of path? How do you see yourself?
I think, well, one, I have huge admiration for him. I actually talked to him about how he prepares for things. And I will say he's like he always broke news with presidents. And he did it in the most calm way.
Although now there's some Wheaties happening with George Stephanopoulos.
I know. People
really
are mad that he said that democracy is important or something. I mean, people are
not just that. Some of those interviews have been
tough.
Yeah,
but fair.
I agree.
But asking tough questions.
I'm jealous of them.
Yeah. I know. It's amazing to watch, and I think it would be hard to make the transition for anyone that he made because of social media and because I wouldn't. How would I possibly, after I just did that job, go to being a straight down the middle journalist, which I think he very much has been and has effectively been over the course of his career. I think that would be hard for anyone to do in this age.
Right.
I also, though, and this is actually advice you gave me early on, I've had a lot of Republicans on my show. I will continue to. I draw the line with people who don't believe in the outcome of the 2020 election or participated, right? Or like participated in an insurrection, which I think is a fair bar, which a lot of people draw. But I have people on I disagree with. I have people on I argue with at times. But I think it would be inauthentic for me in this day and age to suggest that I was just kind of neutral, because I'm not.
Mm-hmm. And how do you then deal with having been in the Biden administration? We talked about it on my podcast, his age, for example, and that was happening. There's quite a few articles about it.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of changed a little bit.
Well, I know, because after the State of the Union, the like theory switched quickly to the point where people on Fox that night were saying like he was on drugs and needed to pee in a cup. I'm not making this up. This was their argument they were making on air.
No, they made him into Weekend at Bernie's, and then he was running around.
And then all of a sudden he was like on drugs. I know.
Yeah.
You know, I also got advice on this from a number of people who had worked in politics on both sides of the aisle, and one of the piece of advice they offered me is you have to kind of remind the viewers, like, I haven't worked in the White House in 2 years. Mm-hmm. I do know Joe Biden. I can offer insight into how conversations go, what the typical things you're considering. I do think hopefully that offers insights to viewers, but I try to give a little caveat or marker in there to remind people. I also have been critical at times, and I also have not been overly gratuitously critical, but I also have been positive at times when I think it's warranted. I think the State of the Union was very good, as a lot of people did, and I think there are moments that have been mishandled. And so I don't know. I think day to day I try to be judged by what I do and not what I say I'm going to do.
You get a call, like, if you're too critical?
Do I get a call from them? No.
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 So let's finish up talking about just two more things. I want you to give advice to some people. Christy.
Oh, Christy Nome or Chris
Yeah.
Christie.
No.
There's a lot of Christies in our lives.
Right.
So here's the thing with Christy Nome. There's a lot. I think if you're her, now her audience of Trump, I can't get in the whole minds of that, so maybe other people can. But you could have easily said, I think, clearly she didn't write her book, fine. Clearly she did the audiobook.
Probably didn't read it,
Didn't read it. It sounds like it's very notable.
No, she read the audiobook.
She read the audiobook, so she said out of her mouth. And then I met with Kim Jong-un, and she didn't think, I didn't meet with the leader of North Korea. It's like, didn't you think that's not something that happened? But who knows? I would say to her, you could, she went on Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan is an excellent interviewer. She's very tough. She's smart. She's fair. I'm not sure who told Christy Nome that's the right thing to do. But she could have gone and done an interview, maybe perhaps a friendlier outlet for her, and basically said, look, I'm the governor of South Dakota. I have a lot going on. I had somebody help me write this book. And there were things in here that I shouldn't have included. And I'm going to fess up to that. Mm-hmm. But I have met with a lot of foreign leaders, including these ones. And if you grow up in rural America on a farm like me, you know that sometimes animals, I would still have thought some of it was a little weird, but like, it would have been better. And instead, she seemed to kind of like double down, attacking the media. It all seemed very defensive.
Yeah, and so she stopped now. She stopped talking. I think she went over to, like, Newsmax lost their mind on her, which is interesting.
Because, yes.
They were tougher than other reporters.
Yeah, which was interesting, too. Right. Which you never know all of the psychology of. It's sort of like some of these people attacking RFK Jr. now. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, RFK Jr.
The advice I
brainworms.
Oh my God, the brainworms. I don't know what to say about
Okay,
that.
I'll leave you out of that one.
What? I don't know. I was like, well, he didn't announce he had brainworms.
It kind of did.
No, it was like in a 2012 report that came out, right?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to come back on that one.
But he
I don't
has
know.
some traction, right? Correct?
No, he has a huge amount of traction. I mean, look, polls are imperfect. They're a measure of moment in time. But there was a Quinnipiac poll about Wisconsin, where Joe Biden was yesterday, that showed that he might have 12% of the vote. I mean, that's... Yes?
Yes.
I know. Look, everybody has time, but like this is like, be clear-eyed about this real possibility. The Kennedy name is very popular still. Not in a number of states. There's a fair number of people who don't consume as much information and political news as everybody in this room. So it's a real risk.
It's a real risk. Trump in this trial, how would you advise him?
Oh my God. God. I mean, it's interesting to me.
Take a Red Bull for one.
Oh, first of all, I know. Have a little more caffeine in the morning or something.
Yeah.
Like just, right, have a couple of espresso shots, whatever needs to happen in the morning. I do think it's interesting that nothing and maybe this is strategic, nothing he seems to say after the courtroom breaks through. Like it's maybe crazy, but it's not that crazy. What advice would I be giving him? Probably like do more normal events when you have off days, like go do 3 rallies or something like that. Mm-hmm. Go out into the country and actually do things. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. This one is really warping my mind, but I can think about it.
Yeah, I feel like you're not going to work for him. I want to finish up talking. One of the things that's in this book is a lot about your family.
Yeah.
And sort of trying to also communicate with your kids and your husband and your parents and stuff like that. That scene with your daughter who is here, by the way.
She's here. She's read a bunch of the book because she's very precocious and 8 and very smart.
Yeah.
And has been writing her own books.
Okay. Talk a little bit about that, the balance. I have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
You have kids. It's something that I can feel it bothers you and also hard to deal with and the time constraints, but you're also doing something pretty great for the country.
I mean, I think this is something so many working moms struggle with, no matter what people are doing. And I talk about this a lot in my book, including when I was very pregnant with my daughter and was asked to go back to the White House to be the White House communications director. And I really struggled with whether I should do that or not. And a piece of advice, actually a guy, which isn't that relevant, although it's kind of interesting, Bill Burton, who I think we both know, gave me was, this is part of your daughter's story too. I mean, you're going to be the White House communications director and she's going to be a baby, right? And that's pretty cool, and I have pictures with her. But I struggle with it a lot because, one, my kids are magical unicorns. Only one of them is here tonight. But also, time goes fast, and it's really being mindful about kind of what I'm spending it on. I love my job. I loved being the White House press secretary. I love my job now, and it's easy to get wrapped into things and not leave space. But how I thought about it in the book and how I applied it when I was the press secretary was actually some advice from Rahm Emanuel, of all people.
Of all people.
Of all people. Who kind of told me that when he was the chief of staff, and that's a harder job than the press secretary, I think it's fair to say, he would try to preserve Friday nights to have dinner with his family. And even if President Obama called him, he'd say, is it an emergency or can I call you back? And when I was the press secretary, it was also during COVID, you know, we were not seeing a ton of people. We would have Friday night pizza nights. My sister and brother-in-law, my niece and nephew, who are also magical unicorns, who are here tonight, would come over, and I would try to preserve that time. Mm-hmm. Is it like every single day you have all the time? No. And my kids would get up with me at like an ungodly 5 a.m. hour, and we'd be like parading around the house like Peter, you know, like, and that was different too. But also some of it is I kind of worried, like a lot of people do, that people would kind of judge. How can you do this job? And you have these little kids. And there's an element of that I think is sometimes very unconscious.
One part is your husband was very...
My husband also is
here tonight.
a adult magical unicorn who, when the Biden team asked me about talking to them about this job, I was like, I have to talk to my husband first. And sometimes people say, well, this is like so 1950s. And I'm like, no, we're partners and we have 2 little kids and we have to figure out if we can actually do this. And I could do the job like because of my husband. Because he took my kids to school every day. I was already at work. I tried to be home so I could put them to bed. But you can only do it because of that. And that's how I could do it. It's only possible. I tease him because he didn't just like drop my daughter off at school. He would park the car and like walk her to the door, to the point where he was in the yearbook for like walking her to the door. So I could do it because of him. And there's a push and pull. And before I took the job in the White House, he was working on a political campaign, and he was gone a lot and did a lot. But that's what makes it possible. Otherwise, it wouldn't be.
So my last question, then we'll get questions from the audience. We have things up here. We're going to just keep your questions brief, one question per person. I have one from the virtual audience. You have a lot of advice of communications advice in this. My favorite is eat the frog.
It's not even my advice.
Right. It's the idea of, it's Mark Twain. It's
Mark Twain, Glennon Doyle, and then I just stole it from all of them.
Right, which is you eat a frog in the morning, it's the worst thing that'll happen to you, a live frog.
Yeah.
So you do the worst thing. What is your most important piece of communications advice here?
In the book?
Yeah.
An undervalued part of being an effective communicator is listening. And I mean that in many ways. I mean that, and one of the things I've learned a lot from transitioning, and Kara's a really, really good interviewer, I'm sure many of you listen to her podcast, but is that when you're interviewing people, you have to listen. I learned that from talking to people like Kara, but also people I work with now who have said to me things like, no one at home knows your plan, so don't mindlessly follow the list of 12 questions you've crazy prepped. If in question 3 they're like, we should bomb North Korea, like don't move on to the question about healthcare because that's weird. So listening in interviews, but also listening in your life. I mean, the greatest, even though, and this is one of the things with my kids, is like being present. My husband and I still, so if anyone has advice on this, please talk to me afterwards. We are still like laying in bed with our kids like for like an hour and a half every night when they're going to bed, because people talk about like just sending their kids upstairs. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? How does that work? But it is time where you're present, and that is important. And my mother's a therapist. She's here. She's a lot in this book. It's almost Mother's Day. She's a ton in this book. And she is a very present person. So it applies, I think, in work. It applies in mentoring. It applies in interviewing, being interviewed too. I talk about, as you know, the worst PR advice people give is like, answer the question you want to answer. Mm-hmm. It's like sometimes
so stupid. You
sound insane. I mean, it's like if somebody asks you, we were just talking about this before. It's like if I'm interviewing somebody, and I told
Christy Nome was doing it a lot.
Yeah, you're like,
question.
Tell me. It's like, not even, tell me about what, how concerned are you about the threat to democracy? And people are like, roads and bridges are being built. And you're like, what? And people at home are like, what is happening right now? So, so listening, I think, is a big part of being an effective communicator that is undervalued.
And answering the question.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, all right, let's get questions from the audience.
Hey, Jen, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question. What is it about Democratic messaging that is not breaking through? Because in 2016, you had 8 years of the Obama administration, takeover during the Great Recession, the recovery, and yet you not only have Trump win, but you have Republicans win massive majorities in Congress. Joe Biden, one of the most successful first terms since LBJ, and yet I think all of us are scared about November and the way polls are looking right now. So what's going on here? Where's the disconnect?
Okay. This is such a good question. As I used to say in the briefing room, but is true here, there's a lot packed in there. So let me do my best. One, I will say, I worked for Barack Obama for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And what happened, let me take the Affordable Care Act as an example, because for the first 4 to 6 years, it was extremely unpopular. Remember, every Republican ran against it. Everybody hated it. Death panels. People were running away from it. It was actually when people felt it was going to be taken away from them that it started to become more popular. And we also broke it down into different pieces. His policies, Barack Obama's economic work on the Great Recession, his work on health care, other things he did not become popular until like year 7 and 8. And I say this because it's important to remember as you're looking at kind of how presidencies will be judged in history. Joe Biden has some different challenges. One of them is the fact that his opponent is blocking out the sun of media coverage. We can media critique that, and I'll get there in just like a second here. But it is also, there's never been a former president sitting in the courtroom in a criminal trial. So it is a big story. It's a historic story that people should cover and people should pay attention to. It also means there's not as much space in national media as there would normally be, as in...
It's also not as interesting. I mean, there's a porn star. And
well, yeah. No, I was going to get there. I mean,
Yeah.
there is also there's also the paying off of a former adult film star.
infrastructure porn star.
Correct.
Go here.
So that is, it's salacious, it's edgy. Media is a business. People watch. It sells things. That is a reality. What I will say is that if and when Joe Biden is reelected, what they will do in a second term is better be able to sell his legacy and his accomplishments. Right now, the most important thing they can do is not that. It's not about getting everybody to have a fact sheet on infrastructure. It's about laying out the choice for people, and that's what they need to do successfully. There's a lot of factors here. There's also kind of how people consume information, what they're choosing to consume. The majority of people now consume, I mean, I don't, you would know the statistics better than I do, but like people under 35, TikTok, right? How they...
No, Reddit.
No?
Reddit, some other things.
But some other things. But it's not, they're not reading the Washington Post every day, necessarily.
In different ways they are.
In
but
different
yes.
ways.
Yeah.
But my point is there's a lot of factors at play in terms of how people consume information. It's a very good question. But I think the thing to worry about most right now is things not like Joe Biden's legacy on infrastructure. It's important. But RFK Jr., people not turning out, those are the things I'd be more concerned about.
Okay, right here.
Hi, Jen. Joan Michelson, Electric Ladies podcast, and I'd like to have you both on my show, for starters.
Oh, we always say on my team, ABB, always be booking.
Yes,
Always be booking.
I'm booking you now, by the
Okay.
way, and I have a lot of witnesses here, right?
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I should also add, I know what it's like to not get a job you applied for because I interviewed with you and you didn't hire me. But
Oh,
that's
all
another
right.
topic.
Wow.
With you?
Not me.
Oh, with me? No.
Jen Psaki.
Jen
Oh.
Psaki, not me.
I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay. We can talk about it when I interview you on
All
my
right.
show.
Okay. Good.
There
All
we
right.
go.
Questions.
I'm not sure
Quick.
it's
We got to
right
get
in
to
the
all the
pitch.
questions very quick. All
So
right.
my actual question is, how did you find time to write the book? How did you figure this out, and how did you map it out and schedule the time and get it done?
Yeah, Jen,
did
how'd
that
you do
work?
that? We talked about this a lot.
Oh my God. First of all, my husband is right near you right now, and he's gonna, yeah. Writing a book is very hard. It's extremely humbling. I obviously love talking and publicly communicating. I also love writing. What I found extremely challenging is I've never written a book before, and it's not chronological. So I had to figure out how to structure it, and I really struggled with that. And I talked to Kara about this. And so actually I wrote a couple versions of this book until I got to the final book. And what I would try to do, I actually spent a lot of time at the Arlington Public Library, which is a lovely place. That's where I did most of my writing. It's a really lovely place. And I would just write. My brother-in-law, who's also here, I know it sounds like I have like a huge Irish Catholic family. I do have a wonderful family. He wrote an amazing book, and everybody should buy his book too. And he told me, just write. Don't prejudge if it's got a comma, if it's going to make somebody mad. And that's how I tried to do it. But it still was a journey. It was humbling. I'm not going to write a book about writing a book because that's a little meta, but like it's part of a learning and humbling
One
process.
of the issues was that she was writing a book she thought other people wanted her to write and not the book you wanted to write.
Oh, initially,
Yeah.
maybe. Sure.
Yeah.
How did you find the time, though? If you could just.
Where'd you
that was
find the
part
time?
that you didn't ask.
Because I host a show on Sundays and Mondays, I have Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, and they weren't really off. I would kind of spend the whole day working on it. A lot of time in the Arlington Public Library. I'm sorry if anybody works there. I illegally brought drinks in there quite frequently, and I'm going to fess up to it now.
Why are you saying it now? It's
I
the
don't
next
know.
book.
You talked about insider trading.
I know.
Mine was like not even.
But I didn't do it, and you clearly
You
did.
both have
Go
really
ahead, next.
self-incriminated a couple
Yeah.
of times. I remember when you first became the press secretary, and there was a lot of commentary about the fact that you were a working mom of young children and how long you would stay in that role for. As a working mom, or just a woman who has children and also works, I think a lot about those terms of like working mom, boss bee, right? All those sort of like social media terms. I'd love to hear your opinion on just the focus on the fact that you are a mom and your children are young and that you have this big role when so often that is not a focus for men.
What a good question. First of all, I kind of hate the term working mom in part because my children are amazing, but like I've stayed home with them and it is like significantly harder than being at an office. So let me start there. And they're like wonderful and amazing because my daughter's over there being like, what do you mean?
So you're telling us you're not a trad wife, but go ahead.
Okay. No, I can barely cook. But I will say, you know, one of the things I learned is that I tell this story in the book about when Dennis McDonough called me about being the White House press secretary or communications director, and I was like 4 months pregnant, and in my mind I was like, he doesn't know I'm pregnant. I'm gonna tell him I'm pregnant. He's gonna be like, good luck. You know, I don't know. It was like 15 seconds, and I said, I haven't told a lot of people this. I'm pregnant, but I said, but thank you so much for reaching out. I said something like that, right? And he said, to his credit, that's amazing. Just promise me you'll think about it. And like the president's going to call you tomorrow or next couple days. President Obama called me and he said, even if I didn't take the job, I love this part of the story. He was like, I only have a few minutes because the king's in my office, as in like the king of Jordan. And I was like, what's happening? But he said to me, we'll figure it out. You know, I was very lucky and fortunate in that way. But what I learned from that is how much we limit ourselves. And I did not know other people. There were people, I just couldn't think of them, who were like working moms, like who, I now just use that term, who were like moms who worked in the White House. And so what was cool about the last 2 years of the Obama administration was like everybody was pregnant. It was like almost weird. Like everybody was having babies. The people were having, like the dads were having new babies. And it just became sort of part of the culture. And what it taught me is that like I now, as I've managed teams, I like want, you know, I probably like cross HR lines because I'm like, if you want to have a baby, it's totally cool. And people are like, it's like, like please, like you're not supposed to say that. But it's like talking about these things and being more open about it, I think is one of the things that I've learned because then people feel like there are people. And
still no daycare at the White House.
There's still no daycare at the White House. So
thank you.
Joe Biden. The next term.
Joe Biden.
I teach AP Government and Politics in New Jersey, and I asked the kids what they wanted me to ask you, and they could ask policy, politics. As listeners of Pod Save America.
Oh, yeah, I'm doing it next week.
Well, they wanted a story, so we asked Dan Pfeiffer his favorite non-presidential memory. He talked about being hungover on D-Day celebration.
Oh
what's your favorite?
I was there too. I was also hungover.
They want to know what's your favorite non-presidential memory among friends.
Among friends who I worked with. Boy, that's
Were you also drunk with Dan Pfeiffer?
I was. Yes. Wow, that's such a good question. You know, this was actually a moment at the White House. But it was among friends. Is the day, and you know, one of the things that you find in government or so many jobs is that you just like don't always make time to experience the things that are happening. And so one of my favorite memories of all the things I've experienced was the day that after Ketanji Brown Jackson was confirmed, she did this event on the South Lawn at the White House. And I was thinking to myself, I'm so busy, I don't have time. I've got like 800 things on my to-do list, whatever. And I was like, and I was not a pivotal player in her confirmation, but like I could go to the event. I went to the event. At that point, I knew I was leaving the White House, and I hadn't announced it. It was people I was friends with. I like beloved humans that I just like had worked with for so many years. And I remember sitting there. It was a sunny day, and like listening to her talk. I don't know if you all remember her speech. It was amazing, and just like sitting there crying and thinking, "Pull yourself together, please don't stop crying." And looking around, and everybody else was crying too, because it was so impactful. So that was not like an out of office thing, but it kind of was, because you do share these moments, and that is part of kind of the West Wingness of working in the West Wing, those things do happen.
Yeah. Okay.
We just have time for 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Okay. Sorry.
Hi. Thank you very much, Jen, for doing this. My name's Kevin. I'm also a door knocker.
Yes.
So my question has to do with, I think, a good wrap-up of everything you've discussed tonight. You transitioning into your new role as a journalist, you have had the ability to see things through a political sphere and seen the way that, we've been lied to by the other side. And now I want to know, as a door knocker and someone that's going to be trying to influence people and to talk to that moderate or that middle ground person, how do I do that and how do you do it on a journalistic basis, knowing what you're up against? How do you look into that camera every night, like you or Rachel, and just the batshit crazy things that are coming out of their mouths? And how do you deal with that with a straight face and not just get upset? Because I've seen Rachel a couple times get a little emotional, especially when she's talking about democracy and fascism. And how do you deal with that? And how would you recommend I deal with that when I'm out in the field?
Wow. I mean, it is stuff, it's important, right? So it's okay to feel passionate about it, of course, and emotional at times. I think we all can and do, and that's also a part of communicating. I think how I spend my energies is figuring out how to unravel things that are false, right? And are claims that are inaccurate or wrong. That to me is like a real joy. And that's how I spend my stresses, For you, I do have people, of course, on my show, Kara certainly does, that you debate with and you ask tough questions. And of course, for you as a door knocker, part of it, I think, is being that bridge to people. So it's a little different in some senses because it's coming to the conversation very informed, as clearly I think you probably are, I'm guessing.
Thank you.
And using a tone where people are open to hearing what you have to say for a second. Doesn't mean you're always going to convince them. I mean, I would say, if somebody in the airport comes up to me, which rarely happens, and is like, I disagree with you on blah, 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 I'm not going to debate them. I'm just going to say, okay, have a good day. I mean, so you have to realize when you need to walk away, but I think for you, it's about finding the entryway to build the bridge.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
In addition, there was daycare in the last administration for Trump.
There was?
Well, the president needed daycare.
Oh.
I was like, whoa.
Oh, you didn't see that one coming.
Whoa, I like it.
Okay, question that I just won from the audience. I'm going to do the. You go first. Go ahead, quick.
Jen, I know you support abortion rights, and President Biden used terms such as reproductive choice or restore Roe. Now that you no longer need to toe the Biden administration's line, what do you think about the need to use the term abortion when working to ensure the right to abortion?
Look, I think words do matter, but I also think if this is an issue you deeply care about, which you clearly do, the thing is he supports abortion rights and supports preserving Roe. So that's the most important thing. And I think sometimes it's just how he talks about it because that's his comfort level with talking about it. But I don't think that's the thing. It's not the thing I personally, as a strong supporter of abortion rights, I've worked for Planned Parenthood, I talk about this all the time. It's not the thing that even when I worked there, felt I was going to bend myself over an axle over. Because the alternative is what we're seeing, as you know, because you're clearly informed about this, in Idaho and Arizona and places in the country where things are being shut down and people's lives are at risk. So I do think words matter, but in this case, it's just not, for me, the thing that I feel I'm going to get enraged over.
Yeah. Okay, last question from the virtual questions. From Douglas Clark, and it's a good ending one.
Oh,
in
love
Columbia, it says Missouri. Oh, okay. I think it's Missouri. It could be Maryland.
There's a Columbia, Missouri.
It's M-O. That's Missouri, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Would you ever consider running for elected office yourself?
Never.
I would certainly vote for you. You just insulted a voter, not me. I wouldn't vote for you. I mean, I might. I mean, depends on where you run, but
no.
Why not?
I know too much about how you have to raise money, and I've never wanted to be in public office. I respect people who run for public office. This would give me hope, people who are in public office, all the up-and-coming people, but no desire, never, no.
Well, that's a disappointment.
Oh, is it?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, you can do whatever you want, Jen Psaki. Anyway, I recommend you read the book, and because she says a lot more in it. Jen Psaki.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can stay standing where you are, just as our guests make their way backstage, we appreciate it.